You turn up the thermostat. You pull on a jacket. Maybe you complain about it on your way to the car. Winter, for you, is an inconvenience. A few uncomfortable minutes between the front door and somewhere warm. Now take away the thermostat. Take away the jacket, the insulated walls, the car with its heated seats. Push the temperature down until your breath freezes in the air and the ground turns to iron. This was ordinary life for your ancestors for tens of thousands of winters in a row. So how did a hairless, tropical-born primate survive conditions that could kill a modern human in a single night? The real answer is far stranger than they just got used to it. Survival wasn't about toughness, it was about a system, built piece by piece that turned a lethal season into something merely difficult. Picture the far north, deep in an Ice Age winter. The sun barely clears the horizon. Wind carries cold that can freeze exposed skin in minutes. And somewhere in that landscape, a small group of humans is not just surviving, they're going about their lives. Here's the part that surprises people. Human bodies are not naturally built for this. Researchers Laura Buck and Kyoko Yamaguchi, who study cold adaptation, point out that humans are fundamentally a tropical species. Our earliest ancestors evolved in warm parts of Africa, with thin body hair and sweat glands built for shedding heat, not keeping it in. By nearly every physical measure, we are the wrong animal for a snowstorm. So how did the wrong animal win anyway? Not with fur, with thinking. Even so, evolution didn't leave humans completely empty-handed. Populations that lived in colder regions for many generations, including Neanderthals, tended to develop stockier builds, shorter limbs, and wider torsos compared to their warm climate relatives. This follows a pattern seen across the animal kingdom, sometimes called Bergmann's and Allen's rules, where a more compact body shape loses heat more slowly than a long, lean one. It's a small advantage, gained over many thousands of years, but it was nowhere near enough on its own. Biology gave humans a slight head start. Everything else had to be invented. Archaeological sites like Boxgrove in southern England, dated to nearly 500,000 years ago, show early humans hunting large animals during one of the coldest periods in our history, using nothing but wooden spears and stone tools. There's no evidence they'd grown thicker coats or bigger bodies to compensate. What they'd grown instead was the ability to take an animal's insulation and make it their own. Every hide taken from a kill was a jacket waiting to be made. Every bone or antler could become a needle for the sewing. Once humans figured out how to punch tiny holes through leather and thread sinew through them, clothing stopped being loose animal skin draped over shoulders and became something closer to what you're wearing right now. Fitted layers, sealed seams, boots shaped to feet. That single invention, the humble needle, may have done more to keep our ancestors alive through winter than almost anything else they created. We even have an unlikely witness to when this happened. Geneticists studying the DNA of human body lice, the kind that lives specifically in clothing rather than hair, have estimated that this parasite species split off from head lice somewhere between 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. Since body lice can only survive in the folds of worn clothing, that split marks roughly when humans started regularly wearing enough of it to give the lice somewhere new to live. A tiny insect in its own DNA carries a rough timestamp for one of the most important inventions in human history. But clothing alone wasn't enough. There was still the problem of night. Shelter mattered just as much as skin. In colder regions, simple lean-tos gave way to more deliberate structures. Dwellings built from mammoth bones and hide, packed with earth and snow for insulation, clustered close enough together to share warmth and watch for danger. At sites like Mezherych in Ukraine, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of huts built almost entirely from mammoth bones, arranged with real architectural intention, using skulls, jaws, and tusks stacked and braced against one another to form a frame that hide and turf could then cover. Building something like that wasn't a one-person job. It took planning, cooperation, and knowledge passed down about which bones fit where. Inside, a fire wasn't a luxury. It was the difference between a survivable night and a fatal one. Every group member understood how to keep it fed, how to shield it from wind, and how to bank the coals so it would still be glowing come morning. Starting a fire from nothing, using friction or sparked stone, could take real skill and no small amount of effort. Once lit, Groups guarded that flame like the resource it was, sometimes keeping a fire burning for days or weeks rather than risk having to start over from cold hands and dry tinder in the middle of a blizzard. Food changed too. Summer's fruit and shellfish disappeared, replaced by something far more calorie-dense: fat. Cold survival depends heavily on stored body fat and steady caloric intake, and ancient hunters seemed to know it instinctively, favoring the fattiest parts of an animal, the marrow, the organs, over lean meat whenever they had a choice. A body burning calories just to stay warm needed fuel that lean muscle alone couldn't provide. Some researchers even point to a grim survival hazard called rabbit starvation, a condition where a diet of only lean meat with no fat at all can cause malnutrition even when someone is eating plenty of food. Ancient hunters, whether through hard experience or careful observation, seemed to understand this risk long before anyone could explain why. And here's a detail that reframes the whole picture. Winter wasn't survived alone. It was survived in numbers. Groups didn't scatter to fend for themselves when the cold set in. They pulled closer together, sharing shelter, sharing food, sharing warmth quite literally, body against body through the coldest nights. The margin between life and death in extreme cold was often thin enough that a single person's isolation could be fatal, while a shared fire and a crowded shelter meant everyone had a far better chance of seeing spring. Timing mattered too. Long before calendars, groups tracked the rhythm of the seasons through the behavior of the animals around them, and much of the year's hardest work happened not in winter itself, but in the months leading up to it. Preparation was constant. Hides had to be scraped and cured before the cold made hands too stiff to work them. Meat had to be smoked, dried, or frozen in ice caches dug into permanently cold ground, turning a single successful hunt into weeks of stored food. Firewood had to be gathered and stacked faster than it could be burned. By the time the first hard frost arrived, the real work was already mostly done. Winter, for a well-prepared group, was less a crisis to survive and more a season to simply get through. Even movement itself adapted to the cold. Some groups didn't stay in one place all winter, but shifted towards sheltered valleys, riverbanks, or south-facing slopes where wind was weaker and the sun, however brief, still reached. Others followed herds of migrating animals, whose own instincts for finding shelter and forage often doubled as a guide for where humans could survive too. Watching the animals wasn't just about hunting them, it was about learning from creatures that had been solving winter for far longer than humans had. Even in death, the archaeological record shows how seriously people took the effort to survive the cold. At Sungheir, a roughly 34,000-year-old burial site in Russia, archaeologists uncovered bodies dressed in elaborate clothing, decorated with thousands of carefully carved ivory beads, arranged in patterns that suggest fitted garments closer to modern parkas than draped hides. Whatever these burials meant spiritually, they also tell us something practical. By this point, clothing wasn't just functional. It was sophisticated enough to be worth an enormous investment of time, skill, and material, even for the dead. So if human bodies were so poorly suited to the cold, why push north at all? Why not simply stay in the warmth our species had already mastered? Not every winter ended well, and the archaeological record doesn't hide that. Skeletal remains from cold climate sites sometimes show signs of malnutrition, stunted growth in children, or injuries that came from desperate, high-risk hunts when stored food ran low. Winter was survivable, not safe. The system worked often enough to keep the species going, but it demanded almost everything a group had, every single year, without exception. Because the same intelligence that solved the cold also opened territory nothing else could reach. Regions rich in migrating game, free of the competition and predators found in warmer climates, became available only to a creature clever enough to manufacture its own fur. Every needle, every fire, every fat-rich meal was a kind of technology, long before metal or writing existed, and it let humans do something almost no other mammal our size has ever done: walk into an environment we were never built for and simply refuse to leave. You still carry pieces of that ancient system even now. Your craving for rich, warming food the moment temperatures drop echoes a body that once needed real fat to survive real cold. Your instinct to gather closer to others in a crisis, even an emotional one, may trace back to nights when physical closeness was the difference between waking up and not. Even the comfort you feel curled up under a blanket with the people you love might be an ancient memory, dressed up in modern fabric. You turn up the thermostat, you pull on a jacket. You barely think about the 40,000 years of trial, error, and invention hiding behind that simple motion. But somewhere underneath it is a story of a tropical animal that had no business surviving the cold at all and did it anyway. Not through strength, through stitching, fire, fat, and each other.